Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to kick off our Women in Technology and Business panel. I'm going to give a shout out to everybody that is on the live stream. Thank you all for joining. We have a great group here that's going to talk about how they are driving impact, not just for women, but for social and business. How many of you guys, is this your first time at South by? Anybody? Okay, so we've got a couple of people. This is the first round. How about who actually made it to bed at a reasonable hour last night? Nice. So the rest of you are really enjoying the drinks and the food this morning. Okay. My name is Kavya Nath. I am Director of Product Marketing here at Sprinklr, and I'm going to be your moderator today. We've got Gia Hun, Beth Brady, and Beverly Jackson here. I'm going to kick this off, let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, and we can jump into it.
Sure. So my name is Gia Hun. I'm head of Americas at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. That's basically LinkedIn's advertising business. Super happy to be here. Very excited to be with you guys and talk about my passion points. Obviously, working at LinkedIn, social is at the core of what we do. Storytelling through social is at the core of what we do, and that is our mission to make professionals more productive and successful through social. So super happy to be here. Yeah.
Great. I'm Beth Brady, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Principal Financial Group. And I was brought into Principal 3.5 years ago to bring change to a company that, and an industry that was maybe a little behind the times. So our tech stack was not enviable, I would say. And so it's been a really crazy journey, but really happy that we as a company are now leapfrogging a lot of those in our industry, and we're doing it by bringing in capabilities and technology like Sprinklr to help us be in better touch with our customers. So really happy to be talking about this and about women driving change.
So let's try it this way. This better. So I'd like to tell you some really sexy story about how I was hanging out. I think it's allergies. But I tell my team all the time, we're going to thug it out, okay? My name is Beverly Jackson, and normally I'm loud and boisterous, and you have to throw things at me to shut me up. So we're going to see how this works out. But I'm the Vice President of Social Strategy for MGM Resorts International, which is 27 global destinations. You primarily know them as the resorts you love to love in Las Vegas, Bellagio, Aria, Luxor, MGM Grand, and the likes. But we have them in, we have a recently opened property in Maryland, Michigan, Mississippi, one that's opening in Massachusetts. We like the M's over at the MGM. And a couple in China, Macau just opened, and some things that we're working on in other parts of the world. So I lead social strategy for the organization, figuring out what our technology roadmap is for social and the analytics that go with it, as well as strategy around corporate communications, crisis communications, and for our master brand and our loyalty program. So this is probably, in the course of my career, the 4th social media team that I've built from the ground up. Sprinkler's usually been at the middle of some of that work, and so excited to sort of talk about the change that happens in our industry and sort of the role that women play in that.
Great. I personally, you guys obviously have great backgrounds or in amazing positions, would love to hear a little bit about how you guys have gotten to where you're at today with your careers and personally, and the companies that you guys are at right now.
Sure, I can start. I actually spent most of my early career on the client side, working on brands, building digital teams, and without disclosing how old I am, working on digital transformation and building digital COEs within large corporations like GE and Citigroup. And then you know, there was a period of about 10 to 15 years in this industry where it was just a technology arms race, where everyone was investing so much money and time and energy on the tech stack and the analytics and all of the hardware that went around that, And what got lost over the course of that period is the art of connecting with people. And fundamentally, I'm a marketer, and as marketers, our mission is to make meaningful connections with people that either reinforce the love that they already have for the brand or convince them to love a brand. And so I made a conscious pivot into coming to the publisher side because I'm passionate about enabling brands to tell their story effectively and to engage with people in a different way and to shift the focus from the tech and the numbers to the qualitative stories that we need to tell well to make the right connections.
So I have grown up on the client side, so I've been on marketing. I spent most of my career in packaged goods, so working for companies like Unilever and General Mills and Diageo. And I think those companies, that industry was always a little bit ahead of the game in terms of using technology and particularly participating in digital for sure from an advertising standpoint. So I kind of grew up in that world and then came over to Principal as their CMO. A lot of the work I did was turnaround work. So I was the person that when a business was struggling, they would hand it to me to kind of fix it. And so change is kind of my middle name. I mean, that's, one thing when you do turnaround is you don't know what you need to do, but you know that what you've been doing isn't working, so you got to do something different. And so that has kind of been where I've been. And so change. When I came to Principal, our particularly social, we really weren't doing anything. We weren't monitoring really well. We weren't participating. And that's a pretty scary thing. As a CMO, I'm responsible for reputation, and all you have to do is take a look at what happened to United Airlines, and overnight, their brand, to your point, their brand it imploded on them, and so we've been on this fast journey to bring social in. I mean, there's a proactive side about how do we have a conversation? How do we become more intimate with our customers? But there's how do we protect our brand and our reputation? And that, to me, is right there for no other reason. You need to be out there, and you need to be very wise about how you're leveraging social to help protect and build your brand. So.
It's like no one's going to hear that. So I like to think of myself as a professional troublemaker, a disruptor, an agitator, someone who's going to get in and mix it up and throw in ingredients that probably shouldn't be in the mix, but if you don't try it, you never know what you're going to get. And so I come to this space in social in that very capacity. I think probably the first official social media job I ever had was at the Grammys. And I got there at a point where the idea that people were sitting down for appointment television had long since expired. And so it was, how do you use this? The challenge was, how do we get people to watch the show and on Sunday with their families like they did in the good old days? And I think the answer to that question was we don't. We find ways to create content that circles that and make it interesting and compelling and disruptive enough to pull people in. And then when I moved over to Yahoo, it was this idea that people are used to engaging Yahoo on their desktop. And so it was a desktop company. And so the challenge was, how do we move it mobile forward? And so social was the solution to that, because as goes social goes mobile, and as goes mobile goes social. There's no one actually waits till they get to their desktop to update their Facebook or their Instagram, or you snap from your big old desktop computer. So those were things that are just part of the mix for me. So the opportunity at MGM was not that we weren't doing social, we just weren't doing it as well as we could be doing it. And that we have some of the world's sexiest brands, and we have some of the world's most incredible experiences. And how do we empower the people that love us to tell that story? And that was the easy part. That was the easy part, because telling people to tell fun stories didn't really didn't really leverage my best skills. My best skills are, how do I get people to love us when things go bad? How do I get people to stand up for us when other people are bashing us? How do I protect the brand and the market value of the brand and the brand's reputation when things go wrong? And so to me, that's sort of the last 7, 8, 9 months, the last year for certain, focusing on that strategy has been the core of how we use the data, plus the art and the fun stuff to protect our brand. And so that's where social has evolved for me, and sort of that's how I come to this place.
I want to build on what you just, actually, both of you touched upon this, which is the notion of using social to build a strong enough relationship foundation so that when shit happens,
Because shit does.
Because shit does happen. That there's a relationship of trust that's there, that's foundational. And one of the things that our CEO, Jeff Weiner, says all the time is trust is consistency over time. And I had a fascinating dinner conversation yesterday with a CMO who's incredibly trepidatious about her social activity and her company's social activity. And she says, I have it on a quarterly schedule. So we have a quarterly push across all of our channels, and it's vetted, and there's a whole process. And in listening to that, I realized that, if the relationship with your customer or the public is so intimidating that it takes seven layers of legal approvals and a quarterly schedule, that is not going to be a relationship that engenders trust. And to a certain degree, you have to assume and accept that you are going to have a couple of missteps along the way. You're going to misspeak a couple of times, but that's okay because overall, your intent is good. What you're putting out there is an insight into your brand and the truth about your brand and about the individuals that represent the brand. And over time, that should be enough to, weather some of the bumps along the way.
It's so weird because I think the first time we built the COE, so we were like, we're going to build this social media center of excellence at MGM. And some of our leadership took that as perfection. And I was like, no, not the center of perfection, the center of excellence. Right. And that means that humans are in this conversation. And I always tell the story about social in the sense that social is a one-to-one conversation which everybody else gets to listen in on. And so when I think about that, it is you make mistakes. Brands can make mistakes. The goal is to have this sort of support and advocacy from your fans, your followers, your consumers, your guests, such that when you make that mistake, they are forgiving of it. Just like a personal relationship.
Yeah.
So you
She
guys,
has a question.
I do. It's a follow-up. So you guys have clearly talked about how you believe in social helping drive a business and the value that it brings to your customers. While you guys have sort of championed this change within each of your organizations, what would you say is probably the biggest obstacle that you guys faced with other teams, other leadership? Maybe not just where you guys are at now, but as you've sort of evolved with your relationship social.
Well, I can talk a little bit about our industry. So financial services is an industry that has a tremendous amount of regulation, and there's a tremendous amount of compliance that is just mandated. So social, by its nature, is a conversation. It's casual. It's, here it's you and I call social, it's like the virtual cocktail party, right? You want to be there. You want to be, you don't want to be the boring person in the corner. No one wants to talk to, it's really important that you are part of a casual conversation. Well, in financial services, that's a fine line to walk because you need to make sure you're compliant and you're not sort of offering advice if you're not a fiduciary, and there's all sorts of stuff that goes into it, and it's just kind of ugly. And so that's a layer that we have to deal with. So in our company, it's how do we participate in social, and we have to do it on two levels. One is the level as a business and a company that provides financial services. Here are all the rules and regulations. Makes those conversations not very fun. Nobody wants to be part of no one wants to go to that cocktail party. I don't care what they're serving, they don't want to be there. And then there's the other conversation, which is, no, we're just going to talk as humans and, as a financial services company, and people the one thing we can connect with people on life events, right? You just had a baby, you just got married. These are all moments when you might want to be thinking about the things that we offer. So the hard part has been navigating this with the company, because you don't want to say to this other CMO, everything must come through me. I'm going to vet everything before it goes out, because none of us have the time for that. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, your voice becomes really diluted, and it's not true. So where's the fine line, and how do we make sure that people understand what we're trying to do within the company, and empower them, but make sure that we don't run into any problems because of all of this regulation and compliance. So I think that's the tricky part. And oftentimes, I'm sure you guys have both experienced the same thing, is everybody wants to be out there tweeting and posting, and some of them just aren't very good at it. And right. so you're like, I know you want to do that, and I love your intention, but you're passionate. Yeah, but you just aren't good at it. So it's really navigating all of that, because it is kind of an open system. And but when they're representing the company, you have to make sure that they're doing it properly.
So I would say one of the biggest obstacles is exactly something very similar to that, and it's this idea of power. Mm-hmm. And so we're at a place, I don't even think it's a tipping point anymore, but we're definitely at a time where social as a channel, as a strategy, as a platform, as a communications technique has sort of been recognized for the role that it can bring to a company, the value that it has. And so as senior leadership, which is reflected by this panel and others that you guys have had this week, as senior leadership sort of embraces it and starts to celebrate it and recognize it, and budgets follow and titles follow, and some companies have a chief social officer, there becomes this great power struggle, because the other leadership that's not doing the sexy cool thing, because it's kind of like we said, like no one wants to be no one's like trying to be the CEO of the uncool or the vice president of the boring shit. Like, everybody wants to go to the sexy party, and everybody wants to believe that they can wear like 6-inch stilettos all night long, and it's just not realistic. And so what happens is but the people who are good at it happen to be the people in the organization with the least power, the lowest title, yeah, the least amount of, in some instances, education, and the least amount of formal authority in the organization. And so there is this massive battle going on between the senior level folks who think they know better, and that they know the good, and that they know, and they want it, because it's like, well, wait a minute, that's the thing that the chairman loves, that's social, and that's the thing that the CEO and the CMO are talking about. And so you got like all your other counterparts like, how do I take this person out at the knees? Like, how do I Tanya Martin? And so it becomes really interesting, because you got like this young whippersnapper that's like, and I'm not that young, so it's not me, but I'm just saying. Like, and so as a leader, I often feel like I have to be an advocate for my team. It's not about me. It's like these bright, young, talented people, and helping to navigate them through the organization, and so they can see power, they can taste it. They just don't know how many people died to get it. And so they're just stepping over the bodies. And so they don't know that there's like, alligators in the water. They're just trudging right on through. And so that power struggle in the organization, that's to me sort of like the biggest obstacle that's facing us now. Because now we don't talk about social data and analytics anymore. We talk about the social tech stack. Yeah. And that's some sexy shit. And then you start talking about like, I'm a publisher, and I don't know, publisher, I came out of the publishing industry when it was old, before it got disrupted and died. But now we're like talking about it in this other very interesting and powerful way. Mm-hmm. So it's like, what do these young people do? Because they see it and they want it. But the rest of the organization up there is like, whacking them at the knees to go away. So.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything that both of you just said. And I'm just sort of letting it, no, because I'm actually seeing it from the other side, right? I'm seeing that sort of power brawl happen on the buy side as I'm trying to enable multiple parties in an organization. And sometimes my team is actually the one playing arbitrage. Like we're the arbiters of that conversation to say, like, there's one customer you're talking to. Let's figure out how y'all want to get together and collaborate to make this person's experience on social beautiful as it relates to your brand. And so in a lot of ways, like we take heart in sort of being stewards of what we call the member experience and the customer experience. And sometimes the unofficial role we play as sellers is let's bring the parties together so that we can create a beautiful experience. When you talk about the social tech stack, it's interesting to see the vestiges of the old internet media coming to play now. And the way we measure social, the way we think about social in a very episodic, campaign-based way. To use your analogy of the cocktail party, we still have a lot of habits from the display days and the homepage takeover days where you're quiet at the cocktail party, and every 15 minutes you stand up and start yelling, and then you get quiet again. So in a lot of ways, we're breaking a lot of old habits, right? We're saying this is a different watering hole altogether, and our behaviors as advertisers and marketers has to be different in what the expectations are of that cocktail party. And then to your point about regulation, so I've worked in financial services. I feel you.
Feel the pain.
Certainly we're seeing that in pharma. We're seeing that across healthcare. And then GDPR adds another layer of concern. And so it is, a lot of times, I think both the regulatory side and the advertising side, we're sort of walking this fine line together, right? I mean, the regulation is never going to be ahead of where the market is, and so we're constantly sort of aware and walking that fine line together. Yeah,
it's true. So true.
So I'm going to follow up with something that you kind of touched on, you all touched on it, but Beverly kind of got into it a little bit more, is really that power struggle in knowing that change needs to happen, but you're paving the way to do so. And clearly as women in these leadership roles, what are some of the biggest stigmas that you've come across in wanting to change minds more at the senior and executive levels?
So, I'm very fortunate in the sense that my chairman, my C-suite is all in on social. Like, I'm here in this role because they're all in. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with their kids sort of brought it to their awareness. And so that's okay though. Like I oftentimes say, I don't know how you got there. It doesn't really matter how you got there as long as you show up. So I have to go into the chairman. It used to be once a quarter, and now we just talked about it. It's gonna be 30 minutes once a month, where I go into him and I sort of talk him through what we've done, where we're going, what are we trying to do next, and we did the first one Wednesday before I got here. So we've done it. He and I've been talking regularly. We did the first one right before I got here. The most interesting thing that happened was he sent me an email later that night basically and said, I want time where you're just not talking to me. I got some stuff I want to say. Why, yes, sir. You're the boss. You get to say what you want to say. And so the biggest obstacle is, I think everybody gets it. Social's here. You know, whether it's POTUS 45 or whether it's breaking news or whether it's, social justice warriors, social and these platforms that we've come to love are here to stay. Mm-hmm. The challenge now is, how do we use the right platforms to drive results in our business? And we need collaboration from the other stakeholders in that space. like in the rest of the company. And so it literally cannot be a bottom and a top. We sort of need the other people in the middle and the other people across verticals. And to me, it is hearing what they think they want to achieve. And so he may have an idea and he thinks it's as simple as, let's put up a YouTube channel, or let's create a snap filter, or whatever the thing is, the individual tactical thing is he's thinking. And so it's my job to sort of dig past that, to figure out what he's truly trying to accomplish, and figure out the right strategy, and then enable people across the organization in other verticals to do that. And I really do think that's the biggest obstacle to success, at least in my environment right now.
So, so a couple of different things you asked in that question. But I would start by saying when I joined Principal, I basically said I'm not going to join this company unless I have a seat at the table. Which meant that I was going, and I report right into the CEO. And I think that's really important, because when you're trying to bring change, and I'm charged with bringing change, oftentimes though, and you'll all experience it at some point in your career, and I know you have it, both of you have, as well, is people say, I want you to come in and bring change. And then you come in and
it's in your purse.
Yeah, right, yeah.
That's why it's so big.
But then you go and bring it, and you start bringing it, and they're like, well, wait a second, I didn't want you to do that. I just wanted you to bring change, but you're like rocking the world here. And so it's a tough role. And so you have to negotiate your position at the table, is what I always say. It was interesting, I was in Davos this year for the World Economic Forum. And to the question about women, there were two themes in Davos. The first one was very obvious, technology, and how technology is changing the world. It's going to change the way work happens. It's going to change, people are going to not work as many hours. They're going to be 3 days a week, and all sorts of things about how technology and everything is changing the world. The other one was gender bias. And that was a big theme at Davos this year. Almost every panel, they talked about gender bias. Well, you think about it, you go like, gender bias? Well, Davos by its very nature is diverse. People coming from all over the world, a lot of ethnicity, a lot of religious diversity. But Davos, if you go in Congress, less than 20% of attendees are women. So the whole gender bias thing really, really comes out. So what does that mean? Well, that just means that as a woman in any senior leadership role, you're still forging new territory. You're still groundbreaking. You're still a trailblazer, even if you're in a company that is great, because it's just the females as leaders are still growing up. And it's just a fact of life. I mean, now over 50% of the workforce is women, but they haven't been in the workforce in a consistent way for as many years as men. So you're still working against that. So then you add to that women in an industry like financial services, which is male dominated, and then you add the other layer to it, which is, oh, and by the way, I'm going to be driving technology change in a company. All of those things are really a really odd intersection, and it makes it very challenging. So you have to negotiate your seat at the table, and you have to be very clear about what it looks like when you're bringing change. To your question about when I went into a Principal, and I mean, we have a very talented leadership team. They're really, really good. They don't understand marketing. I can tell you that right now. And so they kept talking about fintech, 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 right? So I was like, okay, but the biggest spend is in MarTech. And what's MarTech? That's the challenge I face. Didn't even know what MarTech was. I had to explain it, and I'm talking very senior people. I'm like, well, see how financial technology, marketing. So anyway, I think the challenges are there's so many challenges. What I would say though is this is the best time ever to be a change agent. Best time, and it doesn't matter if you're a woman or a man or whatever. This is a great time to be out there bringing change, because everybody recognizes the need for it. And there's not a lot of people that can actually do it. It's a tough thing.
I'm going to take a slightly different take on the question and just feeding off of your comments around Davos. And so one of the interesting vantage points that we have as LinkedIn is we get to see kind of what is happening in terms of profiles on LinkedIn, career trajectories, individuals' connectedness. And there's some really interesting data points that we looked at before coming here as a team in terms of what are really the gender differences. And some of the gender bias as it pertains to career trajectory and how women talk about their successes and their accomplishment, it really manifests itself in the way they write their profiles. For instance, women's profiles generally tend to be shorter in terms of word length, period. Most times brevity is good, but it also points to the fact that women are generally not as expressive and don't do a great job of cataloging all of their big accomplishments. We look at things like, how often are women engaging in the platform in terms of sharing their professional successes or what they're doing, sharing glimpses of their work life. Men tend to be a little more active on the platform doing that. And these are all sort of subtle things that I think feed into some of the gender biases that occurs in the talent pipelining process, in the hiring process, in how women get promoted and are celebrated in the industry. And so, part of our mission and one of the activations that we're doing here is we're rocking people's profiles during the event and in partnerships with the Girls Lounge, where we're, one profile at a time. We want to make women a little more productive on LinkedIn.
Can you do mine?
I will
I was going to ask the same thing.
Could you look mine up?
But that's something that I don't know that we've taken a close enough look at that in terms of those behavioral differences that's happening on social that's really affecting, and in a lot of cases, continuing to feed some of the existing gender biases.
You're absolutely right.
So it's weird though, because MGM is a majority. Sorry. MGM is a majority minority company. So the majority of our employees are actually minorities. Lots of women in a lot of different roles. We're super fortunate in our C-suite. We've got tons of women. But I actually lead a team full of young women. And one of the things that I am sort of focused on, because this isn't going to happen with me or for me, and it's really not about me, it's about them. And so I oftentimes am challenging them to think about the work that they do beyond just the stuff that's on their desk.
Right.
And it's like you touch so many other people in the organization, and you inform so many other people in the organization. Make that a part of what you ultimately present, and putting them in positions and pushing them off the ledge, even when they're not ready to be pushed off. Because if I don't do it, they may not get another chance. And they want to really sit back until they're super comfortable and they've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. And my job is really saying, you got to jump now, because that opportunity may not come back around, or when it does, it may be filled.
Right.
And really challenging them to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you talk about gender differences, and keeping in mind that women are not monoliths, so not everyone's the same. In general, though, to your point, when you ask someone, and this comes through in the way people talk about it on our platform and in their profiles, is don't tell me what your job description is. Tell me what your organizational impact is. Tell me what your social impact is. Tell me how, as a function of your job, you're making a valuable contribution to the company and beyond. And that's the language that we have to change, and that's the mindset that I think statistically men tend to have an easier time with than women, based on the data that we've seen. And so, I'm so happy to hear that that's sort of, the conversation and the dialogue that you're having within your teams.
So what would you say would be the 2 to 3 most important leadership skills that women could focus on outside of what a couple things that you guys have mentioned, for women who are wanting to grow within an organization?
So for me, my team is absolutely sick of me talking about grit. I actually think about grit as sort of a requisite for any job, because I have always been a change agent, as you guys have been. So grit/tenacity is one. We talk about growth mindset a lot, in terms of, forget perfectionism, embrace failure as opportunities to learn, embrace failure as opportunities to iterate, and think about what you can learn now and grow from that later. And then the last part is compassion. And I don't mean compassion in a totally Mother Teresa sense. I mean compassion in that you can think from someone else's perspective, and you can understand and interpret a situation from someone else's perspective. And all three things have been essential for me in sort of navigating through my career in constant change.
I would say, and they're similar. I mean, I would say for men and women, it's the same thing. I think that perhaps women don't do some things, to your point, as well as men, and it's probably vice versa. But so one would be leverage what women do really well is they tend to be very caring, right? They tend to really care about people, and I think in this world, those companies and brands and people that are human, that really show their humanity, it's really important. So leverage something that's already maybe a little bit part of the DNA, which is this sort of caring component. Curiosity, be very curious. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to go explore. Don't be afraid to be adventurous. I think that's really, because it's not like, I'd say, the old days where you start in a company and in a job and the career path is this way. It's going to be very different going forward. And I even stay doing this as long as I have been doing. It's like I'm still not sure what I'm going to be when I grow up. But I think that's really important, to not be afraid to be curious. And then the final one would be voice. Is have a voice. Have and voice on two fronts. One is, what do you stand for? And be clear about that and speak up and have a voice. And that's probably the area where women aren't maybe as well developed in that skill set as men. I find that the men that work for me have a much better time of standing up and speaking out about what's important to them, and the women have a tendency to maybe be a little bit quieter in the conversation. And so have that voice. What do you stand for? And make sure you speak up.
So there aren't any others to really say, because, so, I say this to my team all the time, intellectual curiosity. Don't ask me questions just because you just decided you were gonna ask a question, but have a desire to know more. Have a desire to live beyond where you find yourself, whether it's your role, your town, your relationship, whatever it is. Push yourselves outside, have an intellectual curiosity. I do this thing with my nieces and my goddaughters, because I don't have kids, but I feel like if my sisters don't do it or my friends don't do it, I do this thing. So in my family, when you graduate from high school, Aunt Beth takes you anywhere in the world you want to go. You get to pick the trip, I pay for it, but if you don't make the itinerary, we will sit in the hotel room. And they have found this out the hard way. We got to Paris and sat there in a hotel room, and they were like, what are we gonna do? I was like, I don't know, what are we gonna do? What did you plan? So, and I do that to them because I want them to be curious about where they are and where they find themselves. The other one I would say is have a voice, speak up, and have a POV. It is simply not okay to show up and nod. If you nod in a meeting with me, there are two things that are gonna happen. One of them is that you have just put a bullseye on yourself, because I am now going to pick on you. I'm not picking on you, but you've now been identified. You've now self-selected. And the idea is that now you've got to help carry the water for the rest of the organization or for the rest of the team, because you're just not allowed to be a hanger-oner. You don't get to ride in the back of the car on the sidecar. we're all in this together. You know, this is a participatory sport. Everybody's got a uniform on, everybody's got pads on, everybody's in here every day. And then I would say the last one would probably be, be okay with being uncomfortable. Be okay with being uncomfortable. Like, I walk into rooms and meetings all the time, big meetings in New York, big boardrooms, and I'm the only person that looks like me. I am the only person, without question, has my set of experiences, and if I start talking, they're okay. I know who I am, and that makes it okay for me to be uncomfortable. Because what's gonna happen? I might learn something, or I might add some value to the conversation that moves us to the next level. So those are my three.
Yeah. So you guys have all talked about having a voice and an opinion. I think today, if you look at the screen behind us, women's voices are getting louder. I mean, you can maybe see it behind you, but with, you know, just gender equality and wanting to be heard and having issues that are important to them be something that's addressed, how do you feel that, I guess the way that the tide is rising, how do you feel like that's going to have an impact on our industry and how it's going to continue to drive social over the next couple of years for women specifically?
So I think women, so I have this real issue with like microaggressions and sort of like these little things that sort of happen that seem insignificant that can absolutely wreck a young woman's life. Like, just, you know, it didn't mean anything to the guy or the girl that said it in the office at the time, but it was, you can almost feel how that person internalized it. And it didn't mean anything by it, but you gotta speak up. Like, you gotta say, if you want something, or if someone in some way has offended you or put you off, or, you know, sort of taking you out of your groove or pushed you off your square, you've gotta find your voice to be able to articulate that. And the flip side of it, though, is, and I say this to my male colleagues all the time, is that just because our industry has been dominated by men, it's gaming and hospitality, dominated by men. I actually had an interview at a hospitality company, and I went to go look at the top layer of leadership, and I said, why are there no women? And they were like, listen, we recognize it, we understand it, but it's because in the hotel industry, you move up by going to these little hotels around the country, and you just keep moving up, and it's really hard to do that if you have kids and you gotta move them out of places. And so that's the excuse or the rationale or the reason. But some of it comes from the idea that we say things to each other with no intention of hurting the person, but with no regard for how they will receive it. So the intention isn't to do a bad thing, but you also didn't intend to lift that person up or to help them. And if you don't stop that and you let it go on, then you just perpetuate it. And then you take that hurt and that anguish and you move on with it and you carry it away. It's like a bad scar. It doesn't heal. And so organizations, which are basically collections of people, have to do better at being nicer to each other and speaking with intent.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I have just so much optimism for where we're heading. Yeah, it's always a journey, but when I think about when I started my career and what it felt like to be a female leader in a company, and to be a female that was moving up, yes, some of these things are true. It's like when you have kids and, you know, you're managing that. But I look at the generation that is now, you know, that future leader generation, and I watch how they work and how they operate, and that gives me optimism because they're already, in our company, their collaboration is just wonderful. I mean, you know, they're growing up with less bias just in how they've grown up and how they went to school and in how they've, you know, they've interacted. And I see it across everything from ethnicity to gender to whatever. It's this really great kind of open-mindedness. And so I look to that generation to train us because we're not as good at it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. And I think that's kind of what you see in, you know, women and minorities in leadership is because it's our generation that's not been as evolved as the generation that's coming. So I have a tremendous amount of optimism What I would say, though, is that, that everybody has to be very attentive to making sure that we don't lose that. Because you can get sucked into this battle to get to the top. And when that happens, bad behaviors happen. They happen on all fronts. And so it's really, you know, whether you're a female or a male, or whether you're, you know, Hispanic or Asian or African American, it doesn't matter. Whatever you are, is to being, again, going back to the earlier question, being authentic and being true to your voice, but also recognizing that we're a better workplace when we're working together and we're celebrating diversity, and because we all bring different perspectives. And those perspectives, at least as for me, as a, you know, sitting in the C-suite, I know that our company will better meet the needs of our customers when we reflect our customers. And that means we have to be all different shades of color and all different religions and all different in gender, you know, and we have to reflect that. So, but I'm very optimistic. I come in some days and I look at my team and I'm like, wow, you guys are so more evolved than I am. So.
All right, now
Contagious.
it's contagious. So being a woman, growing up in first the financial services industry, then in advertising, lots of doors were closed to me. Lots of doors were slammed in my face. But because I'm a woman who's had the benefit of really great people, men and women, who mentored me and sponsored me, I've had lots of doors open to me, and I've had lots of doors that I helped open and create. And one thing I think about all the time, particularly of late, is the number of men I have 2 boys at home. I have lots of male friends, and I certainly run a team with lots of males in it. The good woke men who are frankly terrified of what they shouldn't do, or what they can't say, or what they can't, how they can't behave. And so my personal mission has been to really shift the conversation to, let's think about the things that you can do. Let's talk about what good looks like, and celebrating the good behaviors, and celebrating all the productive and constructive and beautiful ways that humans can bring humans up. And for me, that's really our path forward, is to make sure that both men and women in our lives are not on their heels trying to figure out, like, what is the code of conduct here and what are the rules, to everyone sort of getting on the balls of their feet saying, like, what can I do? What does good look like? And how do I move us together in that direction? And I think it could start small. I think it could start with a conversation with, you know, grab a friend. If you don't have a mentor, grab a mentor.
Maybe not grab.
Well, yeah, sorry.
Not literally grab, just.
I apparently I found my voice. I'm sorry.
Gently suggest a conversation within an appropriate distance. But really, just, you know, I'm losing my train of thought. Really thinking about how we chart a path forward in that constructive way. And I agree with you. I'm very optimistic as well. Yeah. And, you know, when I look at my boys, it's they are so much more aware. I mean, the kinds of questions that they ask is both fascinating and incredibly encouraging to me. So I am optimistic, and, you know, the way we bridge the gap between those guys and where we are now is by focusing on all of the small T transformations that we can incite together. So, without grabbing.
Yeah, without grabbing. No grabbing. Okay.
Well, that's fantastic. You guys have been awesome. I would like to open it up to the room. If anybody has questions, we're going to start Q&A. And I've got, someone with a mic here.
So going back to the social strategy side, when we attend a lot of these events about social strategy, there's always consumer brands or B2C that's driving that conversation. For B2B, this becomes a constant struggle, especially with very technical products where the conversation can get really boring really fast. How do we drive a conversation, participate in a conversation in a B2B environment in a very technical area?
So I can start with that because that is a little bit of the world. We do B2B, B2C, B2B2C. I mean, it's just like, it's crazy. But a big piece of our business is B2B. We're talking to employers about retirement plans. We're talking to advisors about how they can best, the products we have that can help their customers, institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, things like that. What I think we're learning, and I think we're all learning in this space, is that if you're just out there putting your product at the center of what you do and talking about that, that's not very interesting. Back to the virtual cocktail party. I don't care who's in that cocktail party. That's not very interesting. But what we're learning from our customers, our B2B customers, is they have a hunger for really good content, just like everybody else. And so, but what is the content that they want? They want, they're as busy as everybody. Everybody's busy. We're all getting a ton of stuff thrown our way. They want you to deliver and develop interesting, engaging, even entertaining content that can help them do their jobs better. So what is the thought leadership that you're bringing? And start with, that's again about, a brand voice. What is the value we bring? What is the knowledge we bring? And then how do we deliver it in a really engaging way? But then making sure that you understand the channel. So for us on B2B, LinkedIn is one of our really important social channels. That's where we find a lot of our customers. That's where they are. Are they on Twitter? Yes, but they may not be on Twitter or Facebook as a customer. They're there as a person. But if we want to have the customer conversation, then we're going to a place like LinkedIn and we're saying, okay, here's some really provocative, interesting information, thought leadership that you can leverage with your customers that can help make you smarter. And by the way, we're not going to waste your time. We're going to do it in a concise way. One of the things I tell my team all the time is when you're developing thought leadership, don't tell me everything you know. Tell me what I need to know. And we, in our industry, and particularly technical industries, we love to tell everything we know. We just want to, the data dump on the desk. Here it all is. And nobody has time for that. So being very, very careful about making sure that the information you put out there is the right information and constructed in a way that is understandable and engaging.
Yeah.
I just want to add something. I have 27 amazing, incredible, sexy brands that 50,000 beds and a lot of slot machines and a lot of shows. The most lucrative piece of our business is actually B2B because the thing that we sell is convention space and meeting services. So LinkedIn, shout out to LinkedIn. Yeah. LinkedIn is taking the leadership. Our chief sales officer is our most powerful advocate, and the work that he does and highlighting that on LinkedIn to help differentiate us in the marketplace from our competitors. It's a B2B story every day, all day, and twice on Sunday.
Yep.
Happening on LinkedIn.
Yep.
So I think these ladies basically illustrated what I would tell you as best practices. The one thing that I will add, just to sort of tie it all together, is what you're hearing is a very keen understanding and insights about the audience and about the customer, and applying that on the platform where the context is right, where people are ready to make professional decisions about their business, buying decisions, consideration decisions about their business. And so it starts with the insights about the audience. And then it is recognizing that you're having a conversation with a person on the other end, even though you are selling an incredibly technical product, using the insight about what they need to know when and how they need to hear it and how they need to absorb that information, having those insights and using that to shape the conversation. And I say conversation because it's not just about throwing white white papers. It's not just about, you know, having a long dissertation about, to your point, everything that you know, but it is about delivering the right nuggets of information and the right insights, by the way, about your own brand so that you can develop a relationship of trust between individuals is how you do it. And quite frankly, it's not entirely different from how you think about B2C, but it's the context that makes the difference, and it's how you think about the context in conjunction with your audience insights.
Thank you. Hi. It's good advice to women to toot their own horns more, enhance their profiles, speak up, but it's only half the story when the data shows that both men and women judge women more harshly when they toot their own horn, when they speak up, when they operate from a place of strength. What do we do to, what have you seen help people at a more senior level evolve their perspective so they don't have that reaction to women who are, you know, have a voice and speak up and toot their own horn?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. And I mentor a lot of women, and I speak on this topic a lot. And I think that women naturally have to approach it differently than men, just because that bias exists. It does exist. It's not right. But one thing I always tell women I mentor is like, you may not like it, but it's reality, so you have to deal with it. So think about, and I would say this to anybody, if this is reality, you can choose to ignore it, you can choose to say it's wrong and I'm gonna do or you can say this is reality and here's how I'm gonna do it. So the advice I give women is it's how you lay out your accomplishments. You don't have to come in and say, I did this, I did that, you know, blah, blah, blah. But you can talk about it in a more part of the conversation way. So if you're just going to go into a discussion and you're going to lay out your resume, probably not the best way to do it. But if you go into the discussion and say, you know, the experience I had when I did this particular role, and this was a project that I was running with the team, and you start to talk about what you've accomplished in the context of how you accomplished it, is getting that information out there. So using your, bringing your voice of what you've done as a part of, but here's how I got it done, and naturally then your accomplishments come out. So it's really about finessing the way you deliver it. But I would say to both men and women, you know, as a leader, when someone comes in and they're just laying out how great they are, I mean, I have a naturally bad reaction to that. I'm like, all right, then good. I'm glad you're so good. Why are you still there, not here? I mean, you know, but whatever. But I really respond well, and I think leaders respond well, and I think people in general respond well to somebody that comes in and thoughtfully tells you why their perspective is what it is. Here's my point of view. Here's my opinion, and it's based on this experience I had. So for me, for example, you know, when we talk about change, hey, I've turned around 5 brands in my career, big brands, like big turnarounds that got a lot of attention. But I don't come in and say, I turned around 5 brands. What I say is, you know what, I'm really comfortable with change. Comfortable with change because I've spent a lot of my career doing turnaround work. And then talk about what that means and why that gives me the unique set of skills I have. So it's really about putting your accomplishments in a context that is about why you have a unique point of view and why your perspective is what it is. But to your point, dead on. I hate it. I hate that it has to be that way. However, what I want everyone to do is say, I'm not going to fight this. It's reality. I'm going to find a way around it. And I think that's part of what you need to think about.
What she said.
I have a question regarding change. I'm in a unique position right now where I am driving a lot of change for the organization that I work for. I report directly to the CEO. And I don't know if it's because naturally as women, we kick ass at projects. But how do you, I mean, change is exhausting. I mean, it's a huge task to take on. You knock out one thing, you're on to the next, and it takes a toll on you know, on I don't know if it's just
Everyone.
women go through this, but
Everyone.
just that mindset of resetting yourself. Do you have any tips on, as you tackle the next big thing, how do you reset and just bring back the energy, like I don't know, like that original energy?
So I actually am horrible at this, but I suck at it. Like, I'm not good at it. I'm always on, I'm super driven, I'm total type A, on to the next thing. I'm exhausted, like I'm perpetually exhausted. I've fallen asleep on the couch more times than I know what to say. More vacations that cost me lots of money have been ruined because I'm glued to my 3 cell phones. But I have a new plan, so you can join me in this. So my new plan is I am surrounding myself with super talented people that I'm comfortable delegating to. And I'm not telling them what to do, I'm telling them what needs to be done and letting them go. And if it means that I have to explain it twice, that's okay. But the reality is having really talented people around you and trusting them to do the work takes some of that anxiety away. Like, I'm here for 10 days. For 10 days. I ain't got time to be here for 10 days. Ain't nobody got time for that. But I'm here for 10 days. Well, we're sponsoring music, so I'm here for 10 days. But I've got some really talented people back at the office that are on the team, and for the first time in a really long time, I don't have like bubbly guts because I'm scared that something's gonna get missed. Like, I feel like they got it. Like, I still need to plug in and tune in, but I feel like they got it. Like I've seen them jump into emails, I've seen them jump into Slack and like handle stuff, and I'm like, okay. So each one teach one, and let it go to people who you believe and trust are comfortable and confident to get it done.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. You need co-conspirators, whether that's your team or your peers or people even outside your organization that are going to give you that tailwind. And even just at a very basic level, you need people that you can vent to, that you can bounce ideas off of. And then also just letting go of the notion that it's going to be perfect because you're the one driving every single part of the process. Similar to you, I mean, it was the day that I let go of my need to control. It was the day that I actually became powerful. And it was a physical change that I felt in myself, probably my blood pressure. Just the ability to empower others. But I think it comes with, and I think this, you touched upon this, is just having a very clearly articulated vision for what it is that you want to accomplish, like what the end game is. And as long as that's clear to you and your co-conspirators, then we'll get there differently than how you might have originally intended to get there, but you'll get there. And you may actually get there in a much, much more impactful way.
So I'm just going to add one thing, because that was a great question. And having, like I said, having done turnaround work for a big portion of my career, I've often talked about the change thing. And one of the things I say is, when you're doing turnaround work, every day sucks until it doesn't. That's right. Until it's turned around. And that's a great day. Trust me. You're a hero for one day. And then you go on, and every day sucks until it doesn't. And so one of the things I've said is, you know, you have to just be tough. There's no, you know, you can think about all of the, you know, get people around you and everything. That is really important, but you also just have to have a tough skin. And you have to be convicted about what it is you're doing, because you're not going to be able to make change if you're not convicted. And you have to then make sure that everybody, and communication is essential, because you need to make sure people are on board with what you're doing, or if they're not on board, that they understand the challenges that you're facing, and that they're agreed to that you're going to be, you know, leading this challenge. But, you know, like these guys, I also think you have to, when you're doing that kind of work, there's a certain amount of it you just have to drive and lead. You need to find time for yourself. you need to find time to escape, whether it's going and, going to a spa, or whether it's going for a run, or whether it's, and I found for myself, being just like Beverly, a type A that never stops, never takes vacations. Even if I do let it go to my team, then I find 10 other things I need to do. So I fill the gap with other stuff. But what I've learned over time is I have to force time for me in there. Because if I don't force time for me in there, I won't take it. And sometimes it's as simple as, I am not going to go into the office today. I'm going to work from home. And that in itself will decompress me a bit. So, but the truth is, when you're doing this type of work, every day sucks until it doesn't. And then that day is great, and then tomorrow is going to suck again. Yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you've done a lot of turnaround work, and it's really easy to show, well, not easy because it's really hard work, but it's easier to show a big improvement or a change. When you work for an organization, which I'm privileged enough to do, that nothing's really broken.
Yeah.
It's actually moving along pretty well. How do you make sure that you and the people that you're trying to lead and the people around you can demonstrate the huge impact that they have? Because we have a lot of opportunities for growth and improvement. How do you make sure that that gets recognized and seen to an outside world?
That is a great question, because actually, when you're doing turnaround work, the challenge is easier to jump on because everybody recognizes it's broken. This is broken, we got to fix it. And so just go fix it. But when you're working on something that's kind of moving along nicely and it doesn't need fixing, there gets that mentality of, don't touch it, it's not broken. And so, and I've been privileged in my career to also work on some businesses that were those kind of little, just these little great businesses that, they're doing okay, but nobody's got attention on them because there's no big problems, and, just leave it well enough alone. And what I've learned is that you have to treat those like perhaps they're broken. So if you go in and you say, it's not that it's declining, but it's growing 2% a year and it should be growing 12% a year. So why are we not growing 12% a year? Something's not working. And so when you go in, and my current business, the current company I'm in right now, that's kind of was my challenge. The company's been doing really well, but we could do so much better. And so it's really about what's preventing us from doing so much better. So if you ask the question that way, which is, why are we not growing 12%? And what are the things that are preventing us from this huge growth? And you start interrogating it that way, you'll start to find out that maybe it's not broken, but it's not perfect, it's not working, it's not, it could be better because we're not doing the following things. And any businesses I've ever been on that I've had to run that way, that's been how I've approached it. And there was one business that I ran that literally, the company literally told me, this thing is just fine, don't do anything. It's just doing fine. But I knew it could be so much bigger. And so went in and, again, treated it like that, did a lot of this kind of stuff we're talking about, right? Brought in capabilities and started marketing it in a different way, completely marketing it in a different way. And that business went from growing, and it was doing well, it was growing like 5% a year to 25% a year. Only because you just have to treat it like it's broken. And then you can find the solutions that you might not have been looking for because you didn't need to.
I'll add to that by saying the job I have now is very much a situation where I walked into a machinery that was humming along. It's actually growing, and we were in hyper-growth mode when I joined. And so the conversation was sort of reframing the challenge to what's made us successful so far isn't going to be the things that take us to our next level of success. And so let's think about the opportunity, let's think about the long game, and let's think about the things that need to happen now in order for us to achieve that end state. And so that gets people out of the inertia that and that gets people out of questioning, if it ain't broke, don't, so just framing it that way has certainly helped me in this class.
So my CMO is on her way here. She's going to land any minute now, and she's doing a presentation later today about the role of transformation in the age of disruption. And so there is nothing broken about the business that is MGM Resorts. Business making money, opening new resorts, got great people, building in the communities that we do business in, that we serve. The opportunity is that we could be doing so much better. Yeah. And so it really is preparing our business and hardening ourselves for any disruption that might come from competitors that we don't yet see. It is this idea of continuous improvement. You just like a finely tuned athlete. You don't stop practicing just because you hit that goal. You keep moving. That's success in today's business world anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have time for one more question, if anybody has one left.
Great questions, by the way.
Yeah, this has been really good.
Thank you guys for being here today and sharing this with us. It's been pretty amazing. Working for a nonprofit and our brand is one of the most important things about our organization. And so over the last several years, we've centralized everything into a centralized email team and a centralized social team. And it's really been good to help us kind of harness that brand and move it forward. But we're at a place where we need to start decentralizing again in some places. So, our field reps need to be able to send emails themselves instead of going to an email team to do it. Or they have their own Facebook pages, and we need to be able to help them do that. But everybody's terrified that they're going to screw something up, and we're either going to dilute our brand because we're not following brand standards, or we're going to make a mistake and we're going to put something out there that we shouldn't have. And we talk a lot about processes and standards and holding people accountable, but how do you kind of instill that ownership in people, especially who are new to their careers? They're the people you talked about who are at the low end of the totem pole and have the least education, but they're so good at what they do, they don't always understand the responsibility of what they have. How do you instill that in them in a way that, one, can make us start to feel more comfortable in giving them that responsibility, but two, helps them really understand what they have at their fingertips?
So I'm going to say one thing, and then I'm going to let both of them answer, because their answers will be more profound and prolific. It'll be better. But here's what I will say to you, because this is what I say to my team. And everybody in the organization needs to get ready for this. Okay, you ready? They're going to mess it up.
Right. Yeah.
They're going to make a mistake. They're going to spell something wrong. They're going to accidentally post from their personal account into the brand account. It won't kill the brand. It'll be okay.
Actually, same thing. We all have to let go. I think it's important, though, that you do set up a structure and a framework around it, because you can have everything centralized, and then there's completely decentralized, and there's somewhere in between. And I think when it comes to, especially when it comes to protecting the brand, for sure protecting the company from a legal and a regulatory standpoint, you have to find that in between. And what we are finding, and it's still a challenge, is we're identifying people that are out there actually in the business, right? We have all these big business units, and they're in the business. They have the knowledge about the business, which is really important. And we're training them on the voice, and we're training them on how to, here are the standards, and here's governance and all of that. So we've got an army of people that we're working very hard to make them experts so that they can go out. Then they train other people. But one thing that for us at least is really important is that we have identified and have knowledge of those people that are going to do it. Those people, even though we train them, even though we put frameworks in place, even though we've got brand standards and protocols and all nomenclature and everything else, are going to mess up. We know that. They already have. They've done it, and it hasn't killed the brand. But it becomes a learning experience, so you need to, when those things happen, you need to identify them and say, hey, we're not pointing any fingers, but this is good for all of us because I wouldn't have thought to tell you you shouldn't do this, but here is something we don't want to be doing again. But the hard part is you've got to let go, and you can't have one person posting everything. It's not good
what happens
business.
when they get hit by a bus?
Yeah, and right. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. But more likely to get hit by a bus.
So, but yeah, they're going to mess up. But I think there's somewhere in between totally decentralized and completely centralized is a solution that is probably the right one.
Yeah. I think what I'll add to that is, yes, it starts with having guidelines and an alignment around how do we want to show up, both qualitatively but also from a legal, regulatory, compliance standpoint. How do we want to show up? How do we need to show up? Everyone needs to have ground rules around that. And then on the back, and then let everyone do their magic in the middle. And when stuff happens on the back end, know how you're going to react. Have a plan for that, because that's almost when I think the most important thing about crises or mistakes is how you get out of it and how you come out of it as an organization. That's important to the organization, but also to the customers. So.
I will say, we all learned from United Airlines, do not let your legal department be your voice.
On the lawyer.
Yeah, I'm just saying, we know that there could be a lot of people with do not let it be your legal department. So all the lawyers in the room, I'm sorry, but we learned that one the hard way.
Well, I think we're at time. I want to say thank you to our audience and fantastic questions you guys just asked, and to our panelists. This was great and very insightful. We're going to open it up. We've got drinks, food, mingle, and be merry. Thank you again for joining.